Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call our meeting to order, and if you would please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to
the United States of America, one nation.
Thank you all for being here tonight. We started something new last week where we are going to take a moment at the beginning of each meeting to acknowledge one of our extraordinary team members here at ACHD. And this evening I have the pleasure of recognizing Diane Roush. She led a team during Wake Up Boise, and we got some very nice feedback about their efforts, so I'd like to share that letter with you. Director Wong, several weeks ago, my husband and I were extremely fortunate to have volunteers from Wake Up Boise come to our home to collect and bag the many leaves on our property. I can't tell you how overwhelming it was to see the team, led by Diane, from your department, as they accomplished the task quickly, efficiently, and may I say, joyfully. Children joined parents and other adults as they whisked away the debris, smiling and offering us warm wishes as we watched in gratitude. Diane kept them warm and motivated with coffee, donuts, and a great deal of encouragement, in addition to adding her own efforts to the task. We were gratified to learn that she and her team specifically requested returning to our home for the second year in a row. I also had the opportunity to meet you, Director Wong, which was a pleasure. My husband and I often feel blessed to live in Boise for many, many reasons, but none touch us more on a personal level than the wonderful volunteers from the Ada County Highway District, or Ada County Highway Department and Wake Up Boise. Gratefully, Barbara Friedman Ludig and her husband, Craig. So Miss Diane Roush is here this evening, and so I would like to ask you to join me in saying thank you to her for her dedicated efforts. And you can take this back also to your team and share just how proud we are, and you are so appreciated. Thank you, Diane. Thank you. Now, to start our meeting, first item is to adopt our agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now to the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless noted. Do we have a motion?
Madam President, I would move that we accept the consent agenda as written.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now, on to our regular agenda. All regular agenda items are commission action items unless noted. The first item on our agenda this evening is the 2020 Microseal, Jefferson Street, 8th Street to 13th Street bike lanes, request for approval. We will start with Seth Jarsky. Welcome.
President May, Commissioners, I'm Seth Jarsky, ACHD Project Manager. Tonight I'm here to introduce Darren Fluke with the City of Boise, who will present a request related to construction of our 2020 Microseal project as scheduled in the integrated 5-year work plan. The city's request is to add the bike lanes originally designed during the 2016 DBIP on Jefferson Street between 8th Street and 13th in downtown Boise, in conjunction with this year's Microseal project. I'll turn it over to Darren. What's that?
Hard to hear you.
Is it? Okay, well, I'll turn it over to Darren to complete the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam President, members of the Commission, thank you very much. I'm Darren Fluke. I'm the Deputy Planning Director for the City of Boise, and here to talk to you about actually two items tonight, but let's start with Jefferson Street bike lanes.
Thank you. Welcome.
So as Seth mentioned, your staff will be doing a Microseal project on the longer stretch of Jefferson this coming summer. And as a component of that project, we respectfully request that the district add dedicated bike lanes on a very particular stretch, and that is 8th to 13th Street. This is the original extent of the DBIP project, which contemplated dedicated bike lanes along this full stretch of roadway. This This layout required the removal of almost 100 on-street parking places, which was somewhat controversial at the time, but it was approved. In the meantime, of course, we were working with the district on the idea of adding dedicated bike lanes to Maine and Idaho. And at the time that Jefferson was built, that project looked more promising. And so it also was redundant with the Maine and Idaho project. And so at that time, we requested that the project only include sharrows and not the dedicated bike lanes, which is what you see on the street today. This is the as I just said, what was implemented with sharrows along this full stretch from 1st to 16th Street, and that cost 0 parking places to implement this. What we're asking for this evening is to add dedicated bike facilities on this stretch from Capitol to 13th. And what this will cost is also exactly 0 parking places, which is part of our thinking here. Since the Maine and Idaho stretches were never built, we have seen some issues with the wide road width here. There's plenty of room to get the facilities, and it doesn't cost parking, so we think it's a real win-win. The city's request here is just to eliminate the sharrows and implement a standard 5-foot bike lane. I will add the caveat that we think there's some additional width in the roadway, and by taking 6 inches off that 11.5-foot travel lane and 6 inches off a 9-foot parking lane on either side, that there might be the opportunity to buffer the bike facility actually on both sides, in between the door zone as well as the travel zone. And so we would ask that that be considered through the design process, provided that we don't go below an 11-foot travel lane, nor the minimum 8-foot needed for parking. So this stretch is important for the downtown bike network as a whole. We do pretty well in an east-west direction in downtown, but from a north-south perspective, we're somewhat challenged. And this 8th Street, this stretch here will connect up 8th Street with the proposed 11th Street bikeway, which we'll be talking to you more about in future meetings. But this does really fill a gap within the system. 8th is the most used bike lane in downtown, bar none. It carries the most traffic. And this will make a really nice connection in between that 8th and Capitol stretch over to both 10th Street and 11th, which provide good connectivity north of State Street. So that's our request, and that's the why of the request. If you had questions, I'd be happy to stand for those now.
Yeah, I have a couple
Commissioner
questions.
Hanson?
Just a couple questions, since I was here when we decided to put in sharrows along that area. And I do recognize that, in fact, because that stretch is so incredibly wide, what I've observed is people actually using it to pass or to turn, get into the right of another car. They basically use the width of that lane, almost like 2 lanes in each direction, especially if no one's happened to be parking there. But that problem may continue if it's just paint separating. Is there anything design feature the city and the staff can do to prevent this kind of using the bike lane as a passing lane or a turning lane when it's not intended to?
Madam President, Commissioner, thank you for the question. I guess the way I'd answer that is to say if we were looking at the entire stretch of the roadway, that there might be superior configurations for buffering that bike lane from the travel lane in a way that physically prevented cars from moving over there. On this limited stretch, we felt previously, and we feel still, that mixing bike facilities is really not the best treatment. We would like them to be continuous across the stretch to the greatest extent possible. And so there may be some opportunity for that, but that really was outside of the scope of our request.
Thank you. Any other
Great,
questions?
thanks. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I've noticed that of all the downtown traffic, Jefferson, of course, doesn't get a lot because it's now disconnected from the east end because of the vacation over by St. Luke's. So it's probably not likely to have a high increase in car traffic.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
I'd just like to thank Darren for what's obviously a really successful collaboration between our staffs. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate the work with your team as well.
We look forward to continuing good working relationships, and so we appreciate you being here this evening. Commissioner Arnold, did you have a question or comment? No?
I'm good.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak to this? I do have Gary Roeder that has signed up. And other than that, there's no one else on there unless somebody else would like to step up after. Please state your name and address.
Gary Rader, 906 North Harrison Boulevard, representing North End Neighborhood Association Streets Committee. In general, we endorse anything to expand the bike networks that our residents can use, and this is certainly a step in that direction. We do find, though, with this particular proposal, a question as to why it doesn't go all the way to link into the primary north-south linkages at 15th and 16th. A lot of our residents, when they're traveling to and from downtown using those protected bike lanes, make those turns onto these sharrows, and if the width would allow to have those protected bike lanes extend all the way to the north-south network, that would be an additional improvement for our residents. And that would be the only other thing that we would request. We've also noted this in a previous discussion we'd had with ACHD regarding the sharrows that are on River as well. Anything we can do to interconnect the network more while a project like this is undertaken would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Are there any questions, please? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Is there anyone else here this evening that would like to comment? I had you down here, Lisa. It looks like you had scratched this one off, but come, okay. Happy to have you, you bet. Please state your name and address.
You bet. Lisa Brady, 1506 North 12th Street, Boise 83702. Tonight representing the Treasure Valley Cycling Alliance and the Safe Routes to School program. And as you know, I am also your ACHD Bicycle Advisory Chair. I'm really excited about this project. My office is at the corner of 12th and State and Jefferson. So I use Jefferson on a regular basis, and the width of that will accommodate these bike lanes quite nicely. What I would encourage is some better connection on either end of it. This reminds me of BANNOCK. It's equal to BANNOCK Street with the bike lane. And that bike lane on BANNOCK is a door zone bike lane. It's really close to the motor vehicles that are parked there, so we probably see or hear about more dooring incidents than we should. Dooring means that people are getting doors opened into them on their way through. So I'd like to make sure that we do have that extra width to keep people out of the bike lane. Students use that corridor. Jefferson Street is really close to Boise High School and North Junior High, so we are seeing those kids roll through there. We also have a lot of people in transitional housing on their way to the Mission. There's a lot of different uses in there, so I'd love to see that improved. The sharrows in the current places that they're in right now are uncomfortable because of that width. There's a lot of speed out there, and I don't get very many horns, but Jefferson Street is where I might get honked at. So I appreciate this project very much. Transitions on either end will need a close look for safety, moving from the lane into the sharrows on either end of that. So anyway, with that, thank you for this project. I'm excited about it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to comment?
Good evening, Commissioners. Deanna Smith, 1208 East Jefferson Street. I just probably sort of indifferent to this decision, so not here to speak for or against it, but I do have concerns when we put bike lanes in for a portion of a street. I no longer ride Jefferson because it's now closed. I used to ride it every single day, at least twice a day on my bike. And whether we share a street or whether we put bike lanes on a street, one of the biggest gaps we have today is education. So I'm fine and supportive of the city, of you all moving forward with the city on putting bike lanes here. I would really urge you, though, to add the buffering, to narrow these lanes and add the buffering. I now ride BANNOCK. I will not ride in those bike lanes because they're incredibly narrow and dangerous. So you need to make sure that the door zone is adequate. and then there's the bike lane, and then there's the travel lane to the extent possible. Until we have drivers and people on bikes who both really understand these new conflict zones with this new paint, we have challenges, whether it's sharrows or bike lanes. And I worry about people getting in bike lanes thinking they're now safe and protected, who maybe need more education. And when you enter it isn't so challenging, but when you leave it can be very challenging. We need to come up with maybe we need to experiment this time around with some transitional paint or something that informs both the driver and the bicyclist what they should do, because they're merging at that point. I'm a transportation cyclist. I know how to do this. I also work with people like Lisa on trying to help other people learn how to do this, but we have a long ways to go, and there are many cyclists out there today who do not understand how to safely merge, and we have many drivers who also do not understand who has the right of way when those bike lanes change. So I would just urge you, as you move forward with this project, to really think creatively about what can we do to help with that education and with that information as we encourage more and more people to get out there and use this infrastructure. Thank you.
Any questions for Deanna? No? Thank you very much. Education is key. I think anytime there's a change, you need to have that as a main focus. Would you like to respond to some of the comments?
Thank you, Madam President. I would only say that I don't necessarily disagree with what we've heard this evening, and I would just point out that anything that we're requesting doesn't foreclose on the future possibility of extending the bike facilities. However, it is our opinion that it needs quite a bit more public engagement before we were to make that request, because any other treatments that we'll do will start to cost on street parking, and so that's a much broader constituency that we need to deal with and address their concerns. And so that's definitely a potential for the future, but we don't have plans at this point for starting that process.
Thank you. Commissioners, any further comments?
I just want to comment. I would agree with Gary that transition to sharrows, and with Lisa, actually all of them, is really important because it's a change in pattern. And in this one, it's kind of unique. Typically, that transition doesn't happen mid-block, but at one point, it appears you're going to have it mid-block in front of the State House. And I understand why. It's because there's some parking you don't want to get rid of on the east end of the State House. And so it's going to be sharrows basically up to the bell, and then at that point you get into a lane. So it'll be interesting to see how to make that really effective for drivers and cyclists. And the same thing on the other at 13th, where a lot of traffic is obviously turning off of 13th and the volumes go down. The transition needs to be really clear for drivers that from that point on, they share the lane, and they must, probably some signs related to, cyclists must only take the full lane to keep them, otherwise they will choose to go on the sidewalk, and that, of course, is not good.
Thank you. Any further comments? Commissioners, you have this before you. Is there a motion?
Madam President, I would move that we approve the 2020 Microseal Jefferson Street 8th to 13th Street bike lanes.
Second. Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is the 8th Street, Bannock to Washington Streetscape Concept Request for Approval.
Thank you, Madam President. For the record, again, Darren Fluke, City of Boise. And this project, you've heard from us before on, but we want to make a full public record here and give the public the opportunity to weigh in. This is a far more exciting project and far more dynamic, so I'm looking forward to giving you this. what we're asking for here is for the commission to approve our concept design for streetscape and bike lane improvements on this stretch of 8th Street from Bannock to Washington. This was also a DBIP project, you'll recall, and it in keeping with the spirit of DBIP, which was to not rip up the downtown core many times when we could coordinate our projects. And so the district has a pavement maintenance project scheduled for this stretch of roadway. The CCDC was looking at improving the streetscapes. And so working with both of those teams, the city took a hard look at the stretch of road and said, is there something more that can be done to help improve the bike network? And so that's what I kind of want to walk you through. I did want to point out that we do have this vision for transportation within the city of Boise. We articulated that within the Transportation Action Plan. And I won't reread this, but I would point out that this project touches about 5 of the 6 high-level principles that we've articulated in our vision. So it's an important project for us. As I mentioned, the stretch is from Bannock going north to Washington Street. I also mentioned previously that this is the most popular and well-traveled bike route within the city. That would be 8th Street corridor at large, not this particular stretch. Currently, we have no dedicated facilities north of Bannock. South of Bannock, we have the 2 blocks that have a bike facility southbound and a Sharrow treatment going north with on-street parking on that east side of 8th Street. Lack of bike facilities in this area does impact that north-south connectivity that I spoke about in the previous presentation, and particularly on the 8th Street corridor, there's a real gap in between other areas to safely cross State Street. So our proposed improvements include partnering with ACHD. As you rehab the pavement, CCDC would work on the streetscape and the lane reconfiguration that we're proposing. And I'll get into each of these in a little bit more detail, but note that we will be adding a southbound bike lane and a shared Sharrow northbound, which fits nicely with the street section south of Bannock. This is what the proposed configuration would look like from Bannock going north to Jefferson. Currently, there are 3 travel lanes on this road section with on-street parking on both sides and no bike facilities whatsoever. In looking at the traffic numbers, and there is a traffic study in your packet that was done, this stretch of roadway carries very little traffic. And so we asked ourselves the question, are there other things that could be done to the roadway without unduly impacting traffic, without eliminating a whole bunch of parking, and improving not only the bike facilities, but the pedestrian facilities as well? And lo and behold, that's what we landed on. And so on this stretch, we're proposing a single travel lane northbound with the southbound bike lane, and then the back end angle parking, which I'll talk more about in a moment. Going north from Jefferson Street to State Street, it carries a little bit more traffic, and so your team was interested in keeping 2 travel lanes to limit the spillback of the queue at the red light. And so we did that. We kept 2 travel lanes with a Sharrow condition going north, and again, that protected bike facility in the southbound direction, and then similarly the angle in back parking there on the east side of the street next to the Capitol building. North of State Street, we have a split condition here where south of the alley, we have a little additional right-of-way there that will accommodate both the protected bike lane as well as on-street parking. North of the alley, it does cost us the 4 on-street parking lane or on-street parking spots that are there now. We have vetted that with the neighborhood. The church to the east is not excited about losing the parking. The new owners of the Carnegie Library, however, I guess I wouldn't say they were excited about losing parking, but they were definitely excited about the addition of a bike lane and not in opposition to removing that parking. So again, we see this as a real win-win-win solution that improves all the modes with very little cost to anyone. We did hold an open house and an online survey. You'll see that we had 450 responses to that online survey, which is quite a robust response for a project of this size. I'll note for you that 81% of the respondents supported the proposed treatments. It wasn't all good news. There were some questions, which I'm going to which I will address now. And I would also note for you that in your packet, there's a full breakdown of all the survey questions and responses.
Thank you for that.
Some of the concerns included the back-end angled parking. There seems to be a bit of unfamiliarity with this treatment. We did a fair bit of research on this in proposing this because we understood it would be a question, and rightly so. But what we found is this is actually a safer parking configuration than parallel parking by far. We do have an example of this use in Boise. It's in the Bodo district, and we checked the police records on that and didn't find any conflicts or crashes since 2005. Although in speaking with the director, I heard you guys did find one in that time. And so it's a very safe configuration, and you just don't see a lot of conflicts. It's actually easier to back in once you get used to it. And you know, interestingly, opening the car door buffers the driver and the passengers from the travel lane itself and directs people back to the sidewalk, which is a safer configuration, particularly for kids that might be prone to bolting out into traffic. Also, your loading zone for your car backs into the curb zone rather than being adjacent to the travel lane. And finally, the visibility is much better when you're pulling forward to leave the parking area than it is with a parallel park, or certainly with a nose-in angled parking, as you see in some cities. So we're very comfortable that this is a better configuration. I've likened it to roundabouts, which generally the driving public thinks they hate until they use them 2 or 3 times, and then they find that they work perfectly well and they're safer for everybody. The number of travel lanes reduced, you know, anytime you reduce travel lanes, there's questions over that. I will note for you that the amount of traffic being carried here is negligible, and the modeling shows that even in the 20-year condition, we're not going to get close to the capacity of the roadway, and I have a detailed slide on that if you want to dig into the numbers. I should have also mentioned we've got some of the team here. John Ringert from Kittleson is here, and Kim Siegenthaler, the design architect from Jensen Belts, is here, as well as Carl Woods from CCDC. We did hear, and we hear a lot, that 8th Street ought to be closed to vehicle traffic altogether. This is not really an opinion that we share at the city. In our view, it's one of those it's not broke, don't fix it kind of things as far as closing the entire thing off. We have good experience with the 2 blocks south of BANNOCK Street, which tends to work very well for all modes. Not to say that there aren't conflicts, not to say that people don't get annoyed with each other, but by and large, that stretch of roadway accommodates all of the modes pretty safely. And that's really not necessarily because of the low volumes, but particularly because of the low speeds. And so pretty much everybody gets along on those stretches, and we think extending that section is a more sensible design solution to what we're trying to achieve than closing the road entirely. I'd also point out, as you know, that these kind of projects always have trade-offs. When you benefit one mode or one group of people, you often take away from another. And as I mentioned previously, in this case, we think we're doing very well because we're not losing parking, we're not unduly impacting traffic, we're adding far superior bike connectivity to the overall network, and we're also enhancing the pedestrian realm. It's really a win-win-win situation. I don't disagree with this second to last bullet. I don't like sharrows necessarily. We don't think they're a great treatment and certainly not a best practice. But in the way these roads are configured, as I just mentioned, the speeds are slow enough that it makes some sense, and everybody tends to get along pretty well. And then the last bullet, why not extend the project further north than Washington? Similar to the Jefferson questions, that's going to take a much larger public engagement effort. It would require removing parking from at least one side of 8th Street to get the facility north to Fort. Spoiler alert, we are interested in that, and we think that would be a really great enhancement to get people from the north end and into the downtown core, but we're not ready to get there yet, and we certainly don't think the public is ready to go there yet. So we've done the public outreach. We've summarized the input for both you and the city council. And now we're here in front of you bringing this official request. If we are successful tonight and you approve this request, we'll begin construction documents post haste, and we'll be ready to go with your pavement rehab project later this summer.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, does anyone have any questions?
Madam President?
Go ahead. I think Commissioner Baker had some questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Baker, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I just a comment and then a question. Darren, you've talked before about the back-end parking. I think that remains to be seen. I'm not fond of it because I don't do well at that. So maybe somebody else will park there. I certainly won't. But I did have a question. I just wanted to have you confirm that this project would be paid for by either the CCDC and or the city, right? It's not going to be an ACHD paid project.
Madam President, Commissioner, that is correct. We have a cost share agreement pending with your staff currently that should be in front of the commission soon. Is Seth working on that, or Diane? Okay, or Cody? And so if we're approved, we'll have a cost share agreement. Our understanding and our proposal is that the district go ahead with the pavement maintenance project, and CCDC will fund all of the streetscape and bike lane elements of the project.
Great. And then what is the width of the bike? Oh, I'm sorry, what is the width of the travel lane?
They're 11 feet. Madam
Perfect.
President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Anyone else? Commissioner
Yes,
Arnold?
I do have 3 or 4 questions, if I may. The first question is, would you confirm for me that there is 0 loss of parking along this stretch? Is that correct?
Madam President, Commissioner, that's more or less correct. I'm going to look at Zach. I think we may lose 2 parking places total, but some of that is from the on BANNOCK Street in front of the Hoff Building, where we're improving the streetscape, and there are vaults underneath the sidewalk that would preclude the street trees, and so we need to move the curb out to do that. But you know, we pick up most of the parking that we're losing on that west side over on the east side. So I think it's a net loss of 2.
Okay. And then do you have both vehicle traffic counts for this stretch of roadway and also bicycle counts?
We have the vehicle counts. And so currently there's 365 vehicles per hour at the peak hour, which is what we're showing here under the current configuration. Which of course would be the same in the 20-year condition with a very conservative 1% per year growth estimate. We get the 438 vehicles at the peak hour.
And how did you come up with 1% per year? Because that doesn't seem very realistic to me.
No, it's quite a bit more than we would expect to see in the downtown core. It was just, we were trying to be conservative in estimating the future traffic to see what sort of impact we'd have on the road. And so what you can see there is that in the reconfigured state, we could accommodate that 1,050 vehicles in the peak hour, but the modeling shows we could expect more or less 438 vehicles per hour.
And you don't have any bicycle counts at all?
No, we generally don't count bikes where we don't have the facilities.
Okay, but you're asking us to give up vehicle travel lanes for bicycles. You know, we need to have some justification for that, other than you think bikes will use it.
Madam President, Commissioner, fair comment. We're very much of the opinion, if you build it, they'll come. Bike riders are very sensitive to safety considerations, as you've heard this evening. And without facilities there, it's not reasonable to think that you would have a high bike utilization, particularly given the difficulty of the State Street crossing. If it had a significant impact on traffic, then yeah, I think we would need to be more rigorous in our bike estimates, but this has almost no impact on traffic. The 3 lanes are just overkill.
And then my final question at this point, since this is immediately adjacent to the Capitol, did you have a conversation with the governor and with the leadership in the legislature about this proposed project and obtain their input or comments on the project?
Madam President, I did not speak with the governor, nor did I speak with the leadership in the legislature. What we did do was work extensively with the Department of Administration that manages the Capitol Mall area, as well as the Department of Lands, which manages the Hoff Street parking facility. The Hoff Street parking facility, we did propose to close a driveway onto 8th Street, and you have a letter in your packet indicating that they are very much in favor of that. With regard to the Department of Administration, I spoke with the Deputy Director again yesterday, and they, we're not comfortable putting a letter into the packet, either in support or non-opposition. But I am authorized to say on their behalf that operationally they have no concerns with the facility as proposed. And the mayor's legislative liaison did meet with the governor's chief of staff early on after they were elected a year or so ago. And similarly, they expressed no particular concerns given the very low volumes of traffic.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, first I recognize it, both with this and the previous one, why the preference is for the wider 11-foot lanes in the urban core. You know, we do have 10-foot lanes elsewhere. It makes more sense to have 10 or 10.5 foot, but I understand the politics of it. I don't think you need 2 travel lanes between Jefferson and State. Again, I understand the compromise, so I'm not going to push for it. They're just, obviously your numbers suggest there just isn't justification. It is surprising, and perhaps it's because we have 2 jurisdictions, that after 15 years, we're finally getting another angled in parking in an urban core. Finally, 2 more blocks. At this rate, we'll probably have, 10 blocks by the 22nd century, which I hope not, because it's a much more efficient use of urban, and it's much safer, much safer. So I'm glad that at least we're using some data and going forward with a proposal for a couple more blocks, get a few more people used to it. I always object to say we are removing travel lanes when you are adding a lane for people to travel by foot or by bike. And so it's a balance. I'm down there all the time, and there's lots of bike traffic in and around that area. And the one common complaint of people on the sidewalks is if the bike facilities aren't clearly designated, it is not safe, because there's so many people, and it's great. This is a bike-friendly community, and the urban core is heavily used, that if we don't designate bike facilities where there's heavy bike use, then we run into conflicts on the sidewalks. And there are parking garages nearby. It's always interesting to talk about, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 spaces on the street that might go. And in this case, I see it's a net gain of 5 on one section and a net loss of 4 to 6, an average of 5. That's where I assume you come up with 2. So on the cynical side, I say a net loss of 2, but my assumption is, based on my experiences, because I tend not to park on the street, I go into the garage, because it's now been designed to be more financially beneficial to park in the garage than it is on the street. Those garages aren't full, are they? The ones within walking distance of this development?
Madam President, Commissioner, typically not. We do, during the noon hour, sometimes fill up the 2 Main Street garages.
Thanks. I'm glad this is moving, while it's moving very slowly and only incrementally. I'm good with it.
It's a marathon.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Coulter?
Yes, again, thank you for what's been a very close and good collaboration on this particular project. I will have to admit, I've spent a lot of time in the Hoff building the last 10 years. And coming out of there, I seldom notice, I seldom notice any large amount of traffic on 8th Street because of the way it's configured to the south. And so I don't think that's going to cause any problem whatsoever with the traffic volumes in the future. I would kind of, as a hopefully humorous aside, a couple of years ago when we were having a discussion with the Department of Administration, I asked a question about the parking availability in the 8th Street Jefferson State parking lot there. And we were told that the signs were going to be changed a little bit to make sure that the public knows when they are allowed to park there, and that hasn't happened.
If I'm not mistaken, do they just have a minimum amount of public parking there? A lot of them are long-term, monthly type parking.
It's all state employee parking until a certain time of day.
Madam President, that's correct. The public is allowed to park there in the off hours.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the other one on the other side of the street. So, yeah. But I do think I was under the impression that it was strictly for the legislative employees. So, thank you.
Which is why I asked
Right.
my question 2 years ago.
Thank you very much. I think the frustration that you spoke to on the other two sections, the frustration between the bicyclists and the motorists, it's because there's a little bit of confusion. So I think having this consistency extend down through the other two blocks, I think that will lend itself to a little less of that. And I think it's a good plan, and I think it will reap a lot of benefits for all users. So we appreciate working together with you, and we look forward to having you come back. So with that, if the commissioners don't have any other questions, we will ask.
Madam President?
Oh, Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, just one last thing for Darren. I can't recall, is this area in the in a different CCD area than the original 8-block area? Because
Madam President, Commissioner Baker, it is. This is in the West Side Urban Renewal District.
okay, so I guess I would just make the point that if this is in a CCDC area and they're getting tax increment financing and we don't get a dime from that tax increment financing in this area, then CCDC should be absorbing all the cost of this project, including the paving of the street.
Madam President, shall I?
I would agree with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. I know you and I have disagreed on this point previously, but actually the Ada County Highway District does receive tax money at the base rate from this district, and that the reasoning behind that is exactly for this purpose, to maintain your assets within the district. And so we think it's wholly appropriate for the Urban Renewal District to cover the nice to haves that we're requesting here. But the road maintenance is fully within your purview.
Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree then, because quite frankly, the amount of money that's thrown off from the original base amount probably doesn't cover everything that it needs to cover, because that's where the tax increment comes in.
I would agree with Commissioner Baker that the entire cost should be covered by the Urban Renewal Agency. We don't get much money at all from this area, so I would agree with her that the entire cost should be covered by the Urban Renewal Agency.
Madam Chair and
Hanson?
Darren, thanks, because I know that we don't do this streetscape, so there's a huge amount of work we don't do. I suppose we could move forward at a separate time and consider vacating the urban streets as well as all the property taxes that are generated, so you can handle both the maintenance and all the streetscapes and safety and mobility issues. But then every other city would want us to do that too. So I understand exactly. And I think it's incredibly generous that you're picking up all the costs of all the streetscapes and improvements that are necessary for mobility that will encourage people to use different forms of mobility and then in fact benefit other streets. And so that's a good way of using those funds.
Thank you. All right, Miss Brady. State your name and address, please.
Lisa Brady, 1506 North 12th Street, Boise 83702. Safe Routes to School stands in support of this project from our location of our office, again, near Boise High School. One of the biggest issues that I've personally seen in my trekking around in the downtown when we're in our office is Boise High School students on their way to lunch. And a lot of people are riding the wrong way coming down 8th Street. And the sidewalks get crowded during those times. So I know that's 8 months out of the year, but that's a significant portion of the time in that downtown. It's during a really concentrated period of the day. But other times we have people coming out of the north end, say coming from, I don't know where they come from, 8th and Fort or 8th and wherever. And they are continuing to ride down the wrong way. And some of those riders might be your scofflaw rider that we can't talk to. Some of them are doing it without thinking because there's a connected section further down that's a contraflow bike lane. So this is something that I think matters for the safety of all users, a continuity of a similar facility. One of the concerns when this project hopefully gets going will be the care and taking of that turn at State and 8th. So that is an area where there are left turns coming from northbound 8th drivers onto State Street going west. So that's one of the concerns that I would have. Also, it's noted from our friends at Boise Green Bike that during the daytime, there's a lot of loading that happens on that section of 8th. This is testament to how much traffic there isn't on that street because they'll park in the center lane and do unloading of large vehicles in the center of those 3 lanes. So that should probably be something to consider. What does freight look like in that corridor? How's that being pushed off of the lower part of 8th Street? What's going on there? So that's one of the concerns we have. This is part of a connected network. It's a necessary thing. So as we talk about our connections to coming out of the north end, for people coming from the southern parts of the city coming northbound, going to Camel's Back Park, riding their bikes hopefully into Camel's Back for the Hyde Park Street Fair or going into wherever they go. There's a lot of traffic that happens through that corridor, and anything we can do to have people use an alternative mode of transportation, using a bike or a scooter, will be really helpful. So I appreciate this project. I thank the City of Boise, CCDC, and ACHD for really considering this. Thank you.
Questions? Ms. Brady?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gary? Is it Roder or Raider? Raider, okay.
Gary
Okay.
Rader, 906 North Harrison Boulevard, again, for Northern Neighborhood Association Streets Committee. Again, we endorse in general anything to expand the bike network and protecting bicyclist safety in our city. And so in general, we do applaud this proposal. We share the concerns, though, about the lack of a northbound protected bike lane. We just heard from Safe Routes to Schools that you have a lot of traffic from Boise High School. What goes down will also come back up. There's currently no protected bike lane going northbound in this area. And so we would urge the city and ACHD to aggressively use signage to try to protect the bicyclists in this area, as well as the increased number of pedestrians and the multi-modes that will be using this entire network. Let's see here. Now, as a bicyclist comment, taking off my streets hat, just putting on I Ride Bikes. I fully would love to see 8th closed down and turn into a walk plots like they have in Europe. It's the only thing it's used for, I see on Friday and Saturday nights, is for people to cruise around and race their motors. And if you're trying to ride a bike back from the Steelheads game, you're not going to use 8th, because all you got is people driving their cars up there and running their motors and making a lot of noise. And if the traffic's only moving 1 or 2 or 3 cars at a time going northbound on 8th, it isn't moving. The people that actually make turns in there, they can be stuck in a 1-block section for 2 or 3 lights while 1 car gets through because everybody's crossing at the pedestrian crosswalks. It's time to close 8th. So again, that's my bicyclist and my pedestrian hat. Diagonal parking, love it. I bike down there a lot going to and from the library along this A Street corridor, coming back. I've never had anybody open a door on me from a diagonal car. It just can't happen, right? And they look over their shoulder and they see you. Completely different from a parallel parking situation where most of the people still don't do the, what's it called, the Dutch reach. You reach across like this to open your door. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And that'd be something the city could do to put out there is really try to push, I believe it's called the Dutch reach. I think you probably know about that, right? I think, is that what it's called? Dutch, yeah, okay. So that's my plug for the diagonal parking. Let's see here, so Boise High School, that's about all I have.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come up and comment? Thank you. Please state your name and address.
My name is Nina Schaefer, 1002 O'Farrell. I'm here representing myself, and I also work for Boise Bicycle Project. I live in this area, and I'm super, super excited about this project. Currently, 11th Street is really the biggest push for a bikeway in that area, and although those initiatives are great, there are no stoplights on Fort and Hayes, and those are the most dangerous intersections I interact with when I'm on my way to and from work. And I would appreciate having facilities on 8th Street for that opportunity to be able to safely cross with a stoplights. So I would like to put that in as a consideration when approving this project. And I would like to echo what everyone else said about the back-end parking. I think that's a really great and safe way to allow people to see bicyclists, not only when they're backing in, but also leaving as they are already looking at the road. And I think this will be a great addition to our access points to the river and to the foothills, and in addition to the Ridge to Rivers initiative that we have in Ada County. That is all I got for you guys.
We appreciate you coming down. Thank you for your comments. Any questions? Anyone else? State your name and address.
Deanna Smith, 1208 East Jefferson Street, Boise, Idaho. This, to me, is just an absolutely amazing project, possibly the most exciting road project I've seen here since I moved here in the early 80s. I really commend both the city staff and the ASHD staff for sticking with this. I served on the group that, the large stakeholder group that looked at DBIP, I don't remember how many years ago, and the southbound was a real challenge, and there was a group of us from that who actually went out and walked the length of 9th to try, because at the time we were trying to figure out how to do this on 9th. The only way to do it on 9th was to take out an enormous amount of parking. And this idea came forward at that point, and it was very much just kind of an idea, a fledgling idea, and so I really commend the city and your staff for sticking with this and coming up with what is just a phenomenal solution that will really serve all the modes very well. You may not have counts, but all you need to do is look on any day downtown, the enormous number of bikes that are parked in this immediate vicinity. There's an enormous amount of bike traffic on 8th Street. I'm one of those people. I ride that probably a few times a week. And this is just this would be such a great feather in your cap, in my opinion, as showing how hard you're working to really accommodate and retrofit our existing network to safely invite other use. So thank you very much, and I really encourage you to adopt this tonight. I would add the back end angle not only makes it easier to see people biking, it also makes it easier to see cars. It's a very significantly tested and proven safer form of parking than forward end angled parking or parallel parking. So
Thank you for your comments. Any questions? Anyone else? Please state your name and address.
My name is Becky Walker. My address is 10827 West Ustick Road. I am an avid cyclist. I am one of these new people you see on cargo bikes. I fully support the improvements, the angled parking. As someone who's largely carrying children on the back of the cargo bike, we often encounter a lot of safety issues when we're on these corridors that we're looking to improve. There are so many cyclists now that are in the same predicament that I am in, that you see these cargo bikes with kids on the back, and Capitol and 8th and Jefferson, these are daily routes for me and my children. And so I am just in full support with TVAC, with Lisa, Nina, BBP. These would be great improvements. It would be a better quality of life, safer for the children. And you put it there and we'll use it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. That's quite all right. Any further comments? Would you like to take a moment to respond to any comments that you've heard?
Madam President, win-win-win. If you
Win-win-win.
had any questions, I'd be happy to answer those, but I don't have anything further.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, you have an item before you.
Madam Chair, I would move that we approve the request from the City of Boise for the streetscape concept.
I'll second that.
And
First
does that
and second.
include any, who's paying for it? Is that going to be included in your motion?
The determination of the concept already has as Mr. Fluke has described. They're paying for all of the streetscape work, and ACHD, as they do all over the city, is doing the maintenance.
Madam President?
Commissioner Baker?
Yes, I think that since this is in a CCDC area and they have a huge fund balance and it's tax increment, I think they should be the one who bear the amount of this cost. So I will make a substitute motion that we approve the project as presented and that staff work with the City of Boise and the CCDC to ensure that 100% of the costs are borne by the CCDC.
Okay, we have a substitute motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion for discussion purposes.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Discussion.
I do have some discussion.
Commissioner Arnold?
I will not be, I suspect I'm going to be in the minority here, but I will not be supporting the motion to make these changes to 8th Street, and I'd like for my reasons to be placed in the record. I have great difficulty justifying removing vehicle travel lanes when there's no bike data, there's no bicycle counts whatsoever. And we are spending money just 3 blocks away on 11th Street to add bicycle facilities and improve the facilities there. I also think that it seems that there's a myopic view taken of downtown Boise and what the streets should be. And it seems that priority is given to people who live in the immediate vicinity who might want to bicycle to downtown. What gets lost in the discussion or forgotten is that downtown Boise is the seat of the state government. It is the seat of the federal government. It has to be vehicle friendly because people throughout the state come here to interact with their representatives at the state and to use federal facilities. They are not going to ride a bicycle. Somebody coming in from Buell or Burley or Sandpoint, they're not going to ride a bicycle, and they're not going to ride a bus because we have a dismal bus system. So we have to keep in mind that we have a larger group of users that we have to consider. And those are people that have no choice but to come in by car, and they have the right to do that. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And frankly, I don't see a lot of bicycles in that area on 8th Street. I was down there yesterday and I didn't see any bicycles parked in the there are bicycle facilities there for parking the bicycles. There were no bicycles there. I don't think it works well on the other section of 8th Street. I tried to drive it yesterday and it's difficult to get through there. So I am not going to support the changes to 8th Street. I don't think there is sufficient justification to make it more difficult for people who have no choice but to come by vehicle.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Any further discussion?
I would just add, I respect Commissioner Baker's concern that maybe we should be working out this deal with maintenance of roads within urban renewal districts, but let's not just pick off 2 or 3 blocks at a time. Let's do it all at once. The urban renewal districts in Boise, Meridian, Cuna, Eagle, if you want ACHD to no longer pay for maintaining the roads within those, then let's do a policy that does that. Don't just do it with this one particular one. And with regard to capacity, I'm glad that slide is still up. Clearly, we have a downtown that has far more capacity for vehicles than we won't even hit in 2040. The key is to have multimodal options so that the city functions extremely well for automobiles, far more than most cities that size, this size. And so the data certainly shows that this is needed. And my only hope, I hope the substitute motion goes down, because I don't think we should be doing this broad policy of having the city's urban renewal districts pick up all of the maintenance costs, and vote for the original motion. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. So we have a substitute motion before us with a second. Call for the
Madam
decision.
President?
Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I would just point out, I think I've been pretty consistent raising this as an issue over the last year or so, particularly in the face of our funding concerns and our needs throughout the entire county. And so it's not something that I just threw out there on a one-time basis. I've been extremely consistent. Even Mr. Fluke recognized that I've raised it before. I think it's a good project. I just think that it's in an urban renewal area of the city of Boise, and they have, come to us with this project. We never pay for streetscapes anywhere. So that's not anything new that they're paying for. I mean, that's what the city pays for downtown and in other places like on Cloverdale is the streetscape. So this is a way of stretching our dollars, getting the project done, and also recognizing that urban renewal needs to pay the full cost of any project within their respective area.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Being no more move for discussion. All in favor of the substitute motion?
No.
Aye.
No.
All in favor?
One.
All opposed?
No.
Nay.
Nay.
No.
Motion fails. That takes us back to our original motion. Would we have a motion and a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Commissioner Baker? The original motion?
I'm not going to vote, so I guess it'll be recorded as a yes. But I don't want to say aye because I do really think that we're making a mistake if we don't require CCDC to pay the cost.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, commissioners.
Mr. Yorkson just stepped out. We're ready to go on to number 3 on our agenda, Spring Rock subdivision, request for approval. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
She's here.
I begin to think you may have the right idea using your head. I'm trying to pull up staff reports on my phone. It's not as good.
I keep thinking that. Yeah,
I'm pulling them up
that's true.
on my phone and it's not working too well.
It gets it all off and.
Well, it's hard to read.
I pinch it.
It's hard to read, yeah.
Okay.
But emails, you don't have a choice but to pull them up on the phone because they're not.
Okay, we will go ahead and resume with our next agenda item, which is the Spring Rock subdivision request for approval. So we will start with the staff presentation. Welcome, Mindy.
Welcome, President, Maine Commissioners. For the record, Mindy Walsh, Development Services. Before you tonight, we'll have a decision briefing for the Spring Rock subdivision. This is the first phase of the Spring Rock Master Plan community planning area that was before you on December 11th. Today we will have a project overview, a brief discussion of roadway and intersection improvements, modification of policy, and then staff's recommendations. This is a preliminary plat to allow for the development of an 825 lot subdivision consisting of 757 single-family building lots, 7 commercial lots, 23 common lots, 1 school lot, 1 multifamily lot, and 2 public utility lots on 477 acres. The site has frontage on Hubbard Road, 5 Mile Road, and 10 Mile Creek Road, all classified as minor arterial roadways. This development is estimated to generate approximately 9,700 vehicle trips per day, with 1,020 of those occurring during the PM peak hour. As part of the preliminary plat application, the applicant will be making on and off-site improvements to area roadways and intersections. On Hubbard Road, 5 Mile Road, and 10 Mile Creek Road, they will be improved with pavement widening, turn lanes, and sidewalks. The applicant will be dedicating enough right-of-way to allow for full build-out of the roadways in the future. Consistent with ACHD's off-site improvement policy, the off-site portions of Hubbard Road and 10 Mile Creek Road will be improved with pavement widening and gravel shoulders. The pavement widening required by the off-site improvement policy provides paved shoulders for pedestrians and cyclists. Additional improvements include the construction of a multi-lane roundabout at the 10 Mile Creek 5 Mile Road intersection and a dedicated right turn lane. And a dedicated right turn lane on Pleasant Valley Road at 10 Mile Creek Road. So for reference, the top of the site is in red on the south portion of the image there. There are several off-site intersection and roadway segments that are anticipated to exceed ACHD's acceptable level of planning thresholds under existing background or total traffic conditions. The intersections of Amity and Cloverdale and Lake Hazel and Cloverdale are already improved as 3x3 interim signalized intersections. ACHD has pedestrian improvements planned at the Amity-Cloverdale intersection this year, and the Lake Hazel Cloverdale intersection is planned to be widened to a 5x5 signalized intersection in 2024. There is no feasible mitigation that ACHD could require at these intersections within the existing roadway. Cloverdale Road, the north-south roadway shown in blue, has spot widening to provide center turn lanes where feasible. The intersections and roadways in blue are listed as funded projects in either ACHD's Integrated 5-Year Work Plan or Capital Improvements Plan. Consistent with ACHD's Alternative Mitigation Measures Policy, no mitigation is required. There are 2 intersections and 1 roadway segment south of Lake Hazel Road that are anticipated to exceed ACHD's acceptable level of service planning thresholds and are not programmed for improvements. These are shown in blue, or in yellow. The Cloverdale Columbia Road intersection and the Cloverdale Hubbard Road intersection, as well as the segment of Hubbard Road between 5 Mile and Cloverdale. The applicant will be required to improve these intersections and roadway segment when warranted. To ensure that the improvements are made when warranted, staff has recommended that the applicant provide an updated traffic impact study when 350 building lots have been final platted or the site generates the equivalent of 350 PM peak hour trips. If it is determined through the review of the updated traffic impact studies that improvements are needed, then the applicant will install 3x3 signalized interim signals at the intersections and if feasible, widen Hubbard Road to 3 lanes. Subsequent traffic impact studies will be required based on the findings and recommendations of the updated traffic study. Additional mitigation may be required. This development meets all ACHD policies and standards with the exception of 2 roadway offsets located in the southern portion of the development. ACHD policy requires that local streets intersecting minor arterial roadways align or offset by 660 feet. The applicants propose to construct Font Drive on the east and west sides of 5 Mile Road to offset Gem Valley Drive by only 350 feet. That's the northern intersection that's circled in red. And then Mossy Gate Drive to offset Font Drive by only 550 feet. Staff has recommended that the Font Drive intersection on the west side of the roadway not be approved as it's not needed for site circulation, and staff has concerns regarding site distance with an approach on the inside of a curve. Staff has recommended modifications of policy to allow for the intersection of Font Drive on the east side of 5 Mile Road, and then for the Mossy Gate Drive intersections to be located as proposed. The intersections are located as proposed due to topography and the shape of the parcels. They're needed for site circulation. And this section of 5 Mile Road will be built as a 3-lane section providing continuous center turn lanes, and it's not anticipated to carry a high volume of traffic. In summary, the applicant will be making on and off-site improvements to area roadways and intersections. Updated traffic impact studies will be required. The applicant's proposal meets ACHD policies and standards with the exception of 2 roadway offsets. This application was before the CUNA Planning and Zoning Commission on January 14th. They chose to defer hearing this application until ACHD has taken a final action. This has been rescheduled for their January 28th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Staff recommends approval of the staff report as written, and I'll stand for any questions.
Commissioners? Commissioner Arnold?
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. So the city of CUNA still has not annexed this property or rezoned it, is that correct?
President May and Commissioner Arnold, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then we had a concern raised, and I'm trying to pull up the email on my phone that we got. We had a concern raised by a member of the public about the conclusions of law and the statement, and I'm paraphrasing now, that the project will not create an undue burden on the transportation system. So because that concern has been raised, perhaps you and Mr. Price can explain how we make the determination that there is no undue burden on the transportation system, and then go through the analysis on how you determine that in this particular case.
Okay, Madam President, Commissioner Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel. This isn't the first time this issue about undue burden has come up, and I think it's often misinterpreted. The idea of an undue burden on the transportation system really relates to any development projects that would exceed many of the dimensional and volume thresholds that are within our policy. If you look at the conclusion of law, the actual language, and we use that as a basis to exact improvements from the developer so that we can, by making those improvements, then we can assure the constituents of the Ada County Highway District that that development doesn't represent, what they're proposing won't represent an additional burden or undue burden on the highway system. But the actual language is in the second conclusion of law. It says ACHD requirements are intended to assure that the proposed use development will not place an undue burden on the existing vehicular transportation system within the vicinity impacted by the proposed development. And that was something that relates to this preliminary plat, but that with the adoption of the master plan in December, many of those issues, and that's why we get traffic impact studies. We're looking at traffic volumes and dimensional standards. And many of the requirements that are contained within the bulk of the staff report are there with the intent to make sure that the developer is picking up and basically assuring that there won't be an undue burden from that development. And in this case, we feel comfortable that that's what's happening.
Okay, just follow up. So what I think you're saying is the mitigation that's required in the staff report is designed to make sure there is no undue burden. Is that?
The mitigation and additional requirements, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Hopefully that will answer the concern of the member of the public that brought it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Price.
Question that factually follows up on that, so you might as well stay up there, Steve. So what I'm hearing is the undue burden is based on dimensional and volume thresholds, is what you said. That's the measurement that we take.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, that is generally that it's really relates to all of our development policies and in compliance with those. So but those are generally the two big categories.
Right. So my question is there a distance? From reading this, it seems to me what we're only measuring volume, dimensional and volume thresholds within a certain distance of this development, not on the whole system in the entire county. We're just talking about, what is that distance?
Well, we can't require offsite improvements.
Right. I understand the exactions, but I'm trying to understand what the definition of undue burden, which very narrowly.
I think I've explained the undue burden. The analysis is within what the traffic impact study looks at, that entire area, and that's the area that we look at in terms of determining any mitigation or requirements that are necessary.
All right, so it's tied to whether we require them. There may be a burden, but it's just like the burden the taxpayers have to assume because it's a broader, and we can't exact that from a development who comes in.
Well, if I may, Madam President and Commissioner Hanson, one is we're constitutionally limited to exacting mitigation or improvements to those that are adjacent to the site. Off-site exactions aren't. The additional benefit is that through the payment of impact fees, that is the time when we look at as a system as a whole, and when those if the area rises to the level of requiring capital improvements in response to that, then the impact fees are there to help fund those improvements.
Yeah.
So it isn't just, I think your word is myopic. I think that we have a multifaceted way of addressing it, but I take your point, but we're limited in what we can look at.
That's exactly my point. We're so limited, and we limit it even more by then using the impact fees only for certain.
Yep, and that's the law.
Impacts, right, exactly. That's the way we've chosen to interpret the law and the way the law.
Well, I don't think that's why we're interpreting that is the law.
Right,
we interpret it though. We have a lot of intellectual integrity about what the law says, and I can assure you, it's not even a close call.
So I have a broader question for Mindy on some additional cost analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Price.
If I could, unless there's some other comments. My analysis or questions back in December regarding why the proposal wasn't brought with respect to these 9.5 miles of roads, of new roads that will be added to the system. We have well over 5,000 center lane miles, I think, that we're obligated to maintain on behalf of the taxpayers. But we have chosen to accept, we would be choosing to accept these as public, or all these as public roads. What was the discussion and the trade-off with respect to whether they should be public or private roads? And the second part of that is, do we do any analysis of the ongoing costs, both the maintenance, drainage-related costs, the difference between the obligation of the taxpayers to take these roads once they've been built and delivered to ACHD. Do we do an analysis of what those ongoing costs are?
President May and Commissioner Hanson, we don't have a policy to prohibit us from taking over public streets. In this case, we have a preliminary plat that was before us. It was designed meeting our policies and standards. And so we've set requirements and conditions for the construction of the roadways within the development of public streets, or for them to be constructed as public streets, which we would take over and maintain through that platting process. And we don't currently have a analysis that's done regarding the long-term maintenance cost of the public roadways.
Okay, so we don't know what those costs are, but I do have a question for Steve then. It sounds like we're obligated to accept them as public roads if the developer wants to deliver them as public roads and not private.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, if they meet our policy, which I believe is occurring in this instance, then yes, but don't forget that these people will be paying property tax in perpetuity, which is goes towards the annual maintenance of these facilities. So it isn't like they just come, they land here, they have a one-time cost, and we're stuck with all of the future maintenance costs with no recovery of expense. And I think that the tax base increase is something that also should be considered.
Which I would agree with, but Mindy just told me that we don't do that analysis, so we don't know whether in fact the increase in the property taxes that might come from these new residents is sufficient to offset the cost of maintaining this public infrastructure that we would be accepting on behalf of the taxpayer.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, I think we do know what the lane costs are for maintenance, and I don't have the current number.
But that's not part of the record before us, right? So we don't know whether in fact we're accepting this a net gain or a net loss to the
No,
taxpayer.
and I don't believe the issue of maintenance is within the application for a preliminary plat.
Right, I realize that's a separate thing, and that we're sort of obligated, but the taxpayers hold us accountable for what we obligate them to maintain, and believe me, they're holding us accountable.
Sure, and Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, that would be true for any other development that the commission considers.
Right. I have a couple more questions for Mindy.
Thank you, Mr. Bryce.
Has the city of Kuna imposed any kind of conditions related to the annexation or rezone that might affect the transportation or the configuration, the dimensional configuration of this development?
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, not that we've been made aware of.
Has the commission, do you know if the city of Kuna has made any recommendations for ACHD related to transportation or
No,
mobility?
they have not.
No, okay, so we don't know. And that's mostly because they haven't met yet. They haven't actually made any findings of fact and conclusions of law. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other
Madam
questions?
President?
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, just going back to, just a comment regarding the maintenance costs of this project in the future. And I know this is going to sound a little sarcastic, but sorry about that. I just want to say that it's apparently too bad that the Boise City CCDC can't make this a Boise Urban Renewal project, because in that case, we would obviously happily pay the maintenance.
Thank you. Any further comment? Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll hear from the applicant. Thank you, Mindy.
Good
State your
evening.
name.
For the record, Dave Jorgensen with the developer. Chris Finley and Pat Dunslaughter are also part of our development team, and they're here tonight. Also, Deb Nelson, I've invited her to come with us. She's our help with any legal or policy matters, and she's here in case there's any discussion that heads that direction.
Welcome.
For the record, my address is 14254 West Battenberg Drive, Boise, Idaho. I have just a couple of short comments. First of all, we've worked very closely with staff throughout this entire process. It's been very extensive, as we've talked about with the onset back in including last December, where we had the master plan review and approval here. We have two versions of traffic impact studies, both for the master plan as well as for the preliminary plats before you tonight. So we're just in the next step of the process with regard to the preliminary plat and conformance with the master plan. We agree with the staff report, including all of the on-site mitigation, all the off-site mitigation, and the request for the additional traffic impact studies. We just see this as a preliminary plat moving through the process. So we agree with the staff report, have no requested changes to the staff report. Stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Could we take a break? Commissioner Baker lost connection, so we need to redial her.
Okay, take a 5-minute break. Hopefully it'll only take a minute. It's in my bed.
Beautiful, thank you.
You bet.
That was quick.
Commissioner Baker?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll proceed. Mr. Jorgensen, if you'll come back up to the podium. Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Goldthorpe?
Oh, not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Commissioner Hanson?
I just have a follow-up to our question I asked back in December regarding the Communities in Motion's development review, which is attached to the staff report. And it says the same thing. It says this proposal exceeds growth forecasts for this area, and also has concerns about the future commercial, public school, and open space sites. And has the city of Kuna required or conditioned its approval on any greater investment in either commercial or public school or other attractors that people would go to prior to approving additional homes in this area? Has Kuna made that a requirement based upon the recommendations of the Communities in Motion Development Review?
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, if I could just maybe make a comment initially, just to verify it. I don't know if Commissioner Baker heard my comments initially. Happy to respond if she missed something. But before I go there, to answer Commissioner Hanson's question, Kuna has not ruled on this application yet. They did open the public hearing last week at the Planning and Zoning Commission. There is a staff report, but there's not specific additional requirements. We are donating as a school site for elementary school site with this area that is not typical for development. We also have been working, and let me back up for a moment, Commissioner Hanson, this site's unique in that we cover two different school sites. It kind of straddles the border of Kuna School District and West Ada School District. For the consideration in working with West Ada, we've met their requirements. However, with Kuna School District, we've been working with them to try to find a way to actually donate them a school site as well. And so that has not been fully publicly vetted through the process, but I'm being open in my discussion with you tonight that is our plan to work in partnership with them too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think we've seen examples, Harris Ranch, Syringa, and other places where school sites have been donated. It then becomes contemplated, but then there just isn't the market for it because you can drive to it, somewhere else. And so it gets shifted and becomes just more residential. We just haven't seen the commercial development, for example, in Harris Ranch. And there's other developments that have also all over the valley that have talked about, well, we're going to have our own commercial, which will attract people and reduce trips, but that just doesn't happen. Do you anticipate, how is this going to be different? Since Kuna obviously hasn't seen this and hasn't made that condition, how is this going to be different?
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, I recognize that may not be a transportation issue, but I'd still be happy to answer your question. We have thought thoroughly about that. In fact, I've been worried about that, to be honest with you, which is why we're doing a multi-phased approach to this development. We have some commercial in this first preliminary plat. We will have more anticipated commercial in the future preliminary plat phases. And so we've tried to strike a balance of the need for now. if you look at the color rendering, you can see there's a substantial amount of open space. There's a large city park. Some other facilities will be provided to this development. We're actually front-loading a lot of that in this first phase of the development to try to enhance and make this a more positive development on the front end, as opposed to bring the houses, if you build it, they will come, commercial later. We know that's how it works. We have to bring the homes first, but the balance or the amount of commercial we're bringing, we think, is proportionate to the commercial, to the residential. But we've been trying to be very cautious in that approach because CUNA is pretty strict about residential and residential areas and commercial areas. And so we're trying to take a phased approach to answer your question.
No, I really appreciate that. I appreciate your explanation. I'd actually only take exception to your initial statement that where commercial is located, where any use is located, is a transportation issue because people drive to things. They travel to things. They don't just drive for the fun of it. They go to the store, they go to the school, they go to the workplace. And so the chip generation modeling assumes that there are locations, and it's not just the number of trips, it's the distance of trips. And the further out we go, the longer the distance is to those trips. So the vehicle miles traveled is higher when homes are built a long way away from destinations that those homeowners would be going to. The modeling obviously shows that, and that's much of what Compass's analysis tells us. Most of these trips will be long, and it will be long for a long time, so that the amount of distance, the amount of travel will be high.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, if I could just respond. Actually, I don't disagree with your statement. I might just add that Compass's model or their statement is based on an old comprehensive plan prepared by CUNA. And so CUNA has identified this area for mixed use. I anticipate Compass model will change over time. And so we're working as we're going not only for the future, but also the present today. So I'm agreeing with you, it'll be phased, it'll evolve over time.
The plans we have to rely on are those that have been adopted. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a quick, what is the percentage of the open space that you have? I know you stated it last time you were.
President, I think this first phase is, I want to say it's close to 18%, and that does not include arterial frontages. CUNA has a unique way of measuring open space. It's approximately 18%.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Before I start asking questions this evening, I thought I'd better make one ex parte conversation disclosure. A couple of weekends ago, my wife and I had the privilege of being speakers in the religious services at the Idaho State Prison, both men and the women's side. And one of the individuals there who's responsible for setting up those services, who I know from past dealings, his name's Kent Rock. He came up to me and he said, I've seen your name in the news. And I said, yeah. He said, I want to let you know that I'm working with Mr. Jorgensen on financing for this project. And so that's where the conversation ended.
Madam President, if you want me to respond to that, we don't have any agreement with Mr. Rock or his company.
Okay, well,
Finance or
so
development.
much for that disclosure.
Though I appreciate your openness, we don't have any financing arrangements for him to help with our development.
Got that cleared
Thank
up. Thank you. Any further questions, Commissioner Goldthorpe?
One right off is, do you have any idea when the first lot is going to be sold?
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, we anticipate if the calendar, if the schedule works as we think, it'd be a spring of next year.
Okay.
The earliest, if we're really just fortunate, it would be the end of this year. Right? I think it'd more likely be a year from now.
Being conservative, I'd go with the spring. Let's see. That's it for now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Ralston, Gene Ralston, signed up to comment. Please state your name and address.
Thank you. Commissioners, my name is Gene Ralston. I live at 8701 South 5 Mile, just north of this development, within a half a mile of it. In 1971, I bought 40 acres of land, a half mile from this area. In 1974, we built a home on it and have lived there ever since. Over the last 49 years, there have been at least 4 major high-density subdivisions proposed on 100 to 700 acres of land in the vacant area, in the area above where Area A sign is there. All went bankrupt before the first shovel of dirt was moved, and I suspect this one will too, at least I hope it will. City of Boise has attempted to annex hundreds of acres north of this proposed subdivision, including property surrounding us, but decided it is not in the best interest of urban sprawl. I totally agree with the county commissioners, Compass, and others who do not believe the county needs this high-density housing this far out in the county. I urge the Highway District to step up and stop this development, as no other agency seems to have the guts to do it. Most of the other agencies don't like it either, but they're sort of going along with it. But at some point, somebody needs to step up and say, enough is enough. We don't need this kind of urban sprawl. There are 13 homes in the general area above the Area A sign that not even the post office will deliver mail to at this time, and never have since we've been there. Some homeowners have to travel 1/2 to more than 3 miles to a common row of mailboxes on Hubbard Road to get their mail. In the 45 years we've lived there, they have never delivered mail or packages to our driveway. In the 45 years we've lived there, we've seen numerous accidents at the intersection of South 5 Mile and Hubbard Road. You can see at the very top where it intersects Hubbard Road. That is a very, very tight intersection. Intersection has major power poles on the southwest and northwest corners, almost touching the pavement. Both power poles have been hit many times and been replaced. The one on the northwest corner was hit so many times, I'd hope power has left a 6-foot section of the power pole that was last hit there, left it in place, cut it off about 6 feet up, and put 6x6 I-beams on either side of it to protect the new pole that's right behind it. Now, that fortified structure has been hit so many times, it's leaning over almost to push the other power pole over. I'm telling you that that intersection needs attention immediately. Before the 350 additional homes are built, that they're asking to have the traffic impact study done after those houses are built there. The intersection needs attention now, before construction even starts. We often have difficulty. Our property is north of the top edge there. We have to travel south on South 5 Mile Road to that Hubbard Road intersection. We often have difficulty making the turn with our 65-foot-long search and rescue vehicle westbound onto Hubbard Road, having to wait at that intersection because there's no traffic control there, many times for many, many vehicles. Your traffic study, I doubt, is very current. It was 2014 or something like that, the last time it was done. Well, a lot of time and a lot of things have gone on out there. If you dare go out on that highway, you will see many, many, many very heavy commercial gravel trucks now, as well as concrete trucks from the new concrete plant on Pleasant Valley Road are using that road, and it's not in very good condition. With this additional traffic on that highway, as much as it's used by that commercial truck traffic, and oh, might I add, I'm surprised that some of the bicycle riders haven't complained about this as well. This is heavily used in the summertime for bicycle riding. They even closed 10 Mile Creek Road in Hubbard off for certain bicycle races. So this is going to make a severe impact on 2,100 homes in that area, closing that road off for bicycle races. Please, District Highway Commissioners, do not approve this application. High-density development in this area is a very bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Commissioner Goldberg?
Yes, what you said about 350 houses being sold inspired this next question. My understanding is that we're talking about 350 lots being sold or 350 PM peak hour trips. Is that correct? Someone's hiding there who can answer that question.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, that's correct. That would be final platted lots.
Final platted lots. So a final plat has to be signed before we can do any of the traffic studies or anything else?
So just so that we're clear, we've already required a traffic study.
Right.
And that's set the conditions before you this evening. The next condition is that prior to any final platted lots beyond 350, they'll be required to submit an update to the traffic impact study.
Can that condition be changed at all?
The commission can change that condition.
Okay, thanks.
I have some other comments if I have time, but I don't want to, it's getting late and I don't want to take up your time.
Go ahead.
Thank you, thank you.
Just keep it brief.
I might add that this area is in a valley. Any of you have been out there. When the New York Canal was built in 1904 or something like that, they cut off the natural drainage of 10 Mile Creek. The blue pond you see there is a wetland area to this day. The whole valley up through there is currently grazing land, and in the springtime, all the way up until probably the middle of the summer, that land is very wet because there's no natural drainage out of that area. And they propose to build an even bigger pond. It's going to make it even worse. So please take that into your consideration because their traffic street plans and those kinds of things may not, and the drainage plans may not be taking that drainage into consideration. I was told that the geotechnical people were out there at the wrong time of year to detect that high water table. In fact, we have a lady here who lives at the intersection of Hubbard Road and 5 Mile. They had some very severe problems even getting approval for a septic tank because of the high groundwater. And it's certainly not a good place to build 2,100 houses in the middle of a swamp.
I can tell from what you've said already, you've lived here long enough to have at least visually experienced and read about it, the problems exactly as you have indicated that happened further north on Cloverdale Road.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yes, I have. We've lived there a long time. When we first bought the property, we could see 4 other houses any direction we looked. There's probably 500, 600, maybe 1,000 that we can see now.
Mr. Wilson, thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Mr. Wilson? No? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Martha Green? No, okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Peterson, you're on the sign-up sheet, but there's no indication if you want to speak to anything. Nope. Okay, does anyone else wish to comment? Ms. Brady?
Lisa Brady, residing at 1506 North 12th Street, Boise, Idaho, 83702, representing the Safe Routes to School program located at 1177 West State Street. My concern is broad. I have been in a discussion with the Meridian Transportation Commission, the YMCA, PTO, parents, the principal of Hillsdale Elementary School, which is a new greenfield design community similar to this. Right now we're dealing with disconnected sidewalk, disconnected bike lane, and traffic volume issues in a school zone. This surrounding area is surrounded by Amity. It connects to Howery, it connects to Eagle Road. I can transfer what kinds of things that we're having to address right now with the Safe Routes to School program for these parents and students. We have a survey out right now, parents. We're getting I think we're at about 300 responses right now from parents and their concerns over traffic in this kind of area. The school site, as written in the staff report, gives me grave concern, and I hope that it's going to be addressed, because when I read gravel trucks and I read no sidewalk improvement, it makes my job impossible. We continue to do these things without the thought of what it is attracting people to go somewhere. I'm looking at the YMCA right now building a pool at Howery and Amity. Amity's a 2-lane with maybe a center turn lane or a drop lane for a right turn lane. We have a traffic impact that's happening there. It's an attractor. The same kind of thing is happening here. You build a school, you build a park, you have water, and it brings people to that. In a school zone, though, it's inappropriate to place it where gravel trucks are driving. I can't say that enough times. That keeps me up at nighttime. I know we have a problem with housing in this valley. It's in the paper every day. This also, the whole entire project right now, I don't know where I'm seeing any the roadways to bikeways network application put to it. I do see reference to the standard 5-lane center turn lane with attached sidewalk and attached 4 to 5 foot bike lane, which is what we continue to build on Linder, Meridian Road, 10 Mile, every other build. And we don't see people walking and biking those areas because we keep building the same facility. It doesn't attract anyone to do it. We hear people on our bicycle advisory committee saying, we need to come out of CUNA. My people want to ride to Boise. They want to ride to Meridian. They want to go to Nampa. We want to put things on canals. We're trying to get people to connect a network, to give them an option to get out of the car. We're talking about trip generation here, and it continues to put people that are walking and biking, using whatever other transportation that they need, in peril. You build a subdivision like this, what I hear is I can go anywhere in my subdivision, but I can't go anywhere else. I'm not connected to anything. So I would hope just the concerns of the bicycle community as a whole, this is part of the bigger problem. We continue to do these things without the thought of what it is impacting outside of this area. So I will remain on record from the Safe Routes to School program and saying that in no way will we support the school siting. And in no way will we accept anything without a detached sidewalk and a proper bike lane to ensure the safety of the residents of CUNA. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Anybody else like to comment?
President may I please make a comment to address the concerns raised by Lisa? I do want to say, in the staff report, we did make a finding suggesting the relocation of the school site off of 10 Mile Creek Road, and that there will be the construction of detached sidewalks in all of the roadways within the subdivision, including 10 Mile Creek Road, that are part of the current preliminary plat. Staff actually raised this concern with the master plan application as well as the preliminary plat, that it seems more appropriate to relocate the school site somewhere within this area to get it off of the arterial roadway. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very
Can I
much
ask
for
a
that.
quick question? Perhaps Mr. Price could answer. Why would we pass on this until the city actually makes that requirement of the developer to relocate the school site?
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, we're providing a recommendation to the city of CUNA. The applicants agreed to relocate the school site, and until CUNA takes a formal action, I can't respond to that in any other way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam President, if I can also address a comment by Ms. Brady, and that is the public school facility and all of the safe routes to school that are adjacent to it, the sidewalks and all of that, that will come at the time when the development of the school is done. And there's a state statute in the Local Land Use Planning Act that says when considering the application when it relates to a public school facility, the commission, which is the land use agency, shall specifically review the application for the effect it will have on increased vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian volumes on adjacent roads and highways to ensure that the state highway system or local highway system can satisfactorily accommodate the proposed school project. The commission shall request the assistance of the Idaho Transportation Department if state highways are affected, or the local highway district with jurisdiction if the affected roads are not state highways. Basically, the local highway district shall review the application, shall report to the commission on the following issues as appropriate: the land use master plan, which you adopted in December, school bus plan, access safety, pedestrian plan, crossing guard plan, barriers between highways and school, location of school zone, need for flashing beacon, need for traffic control signal, anticipated future improvements, speed on the adjacent highways, traffic volumes on adjacent highways, effect upon the highway level of service, need for acceleration or deceleration lanes, internal traffic circulation, anticipated development on surrounding undeveloped parcels, zoning in the vicinity, access control on adjacent highways requiring striping, signing modifications, funding of highway improvements to accommodate the development. So what you're doing today is we're not drilling down on the school. That will be done, as you can tell, the state statute's fairly comprehensive, what will be looked at when that time comes.
Thank you very much. Two very important clarifications. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Deanna Smith, 910 Main Street, Boise, Idaho. This is the third time I've been here with you when this was before you, and my one concern that I really see is how the design of this first phase is entirely cul-de-saced. I understand that there is no network out there today and very little infrastructure because it's so far outside the developed environment. However, I noticed on one of the earlier staff presentations, there is a proposed collector on the very southern edge. I suspect there are probably proposed collectors in other portions of this area. And I would urge you to create some opportunity for future connections. So that in the area B, for instance, one of those cul-de-sacs not be a cul-de-sac, but be a stub street so it could connect to that future collector. I realize, again, they aren't there today, but we should be thinking about not creating poor future connectivity for what's going to be a very large development. For all the reasons we know, we struggle with those parts of the county where we stop building collectors, we have poor connectivity, we're struggling figuring out how to fit an increased desire for biking and walking into these areas onto very busy arterial roads. So please take a look at that and work with your staff and the developer to find those future points of connection for collectors. So when they come, you're not unable to make those connections. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Anyone else in the audience that would like to make a comment? Okay. Seeing none. Mr. Jorgensen? If you would, please, if you could address the concerns that Mr. Walston raised about the wetlands area and the water table.
Certainly. For the record, Dave Jorgensen, 14254 West Pat Bridge Drive, Boise. Madam President, Commissioners, I'll be happy to answer those questions. Recognizing this is a transportation discussion, but if you want to talk about more things, I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. If you would do that, I'd appreciate it.
I'll start with traffic study. He said these are old counts. That would not be true. You could verify that with your staff. It's updated traffic counts. A substantial effort to update the traffic counts in this area and beyond, and to make sure they're current, and so that's not true. We are very sensitive to the fact about the heavy trucks and the bikes. In fact, one of my partners, Pat Dunslaughter, is an avid cyclist, and we are sensitive to that area. That's why we're actually choosing to do a little more than what would be required along 10 Mile Creek Road, because we do know he utilizes it personally, I know. So that is our efforts there. Specific to the area in the valley, is a big valley of flooding. We do know that, which is why I've been working with FEMA since, I don't know, a year. Working on a CLOMAR with FEMA to channelize the floodplain in this area. And we now have our conditional LOMAR ready to be issued, just to be submitted. It's been technically announced to us, but verbally, So we anticipate it to be in writing in the not too distant future. And so it's been a substantial effort. I don't need to talk about the dollars spent, but probably spent as much money on that effort than any other part of this project.
Thank you for
Actually,
clarifying
so-
that.
Because we too agree, we don't want to have water in people's houses.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
There was a comment about the school site, that's not a concern, meaning we're moving it. We're agreeing with ACHD staff report. It will not be on the colored map as you show. It'll be further interior as ACHD staff report suggests. So again, my comments are, we agree with the staff report. We recognize there are substantial on-site and off-site improvements required for this development. And it'll be phased through the course of the development. We could have taken a lot of different tactics and approaches, but we really do believe this is the smartest way to go about trying to be global in our efforts to try to help in solving the traffic challenges of this and the outer area. So with that, I request your approval tonight and stand for any further questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Goldthorpe.
I may ask my questions in shifts, I don't know. Tell me what consideration has been made for the possibility of the 10 Mile Creek Road on through Hubbard Road being used as a boulevard for moving between Pleasant Valley and Cloverdale. We're talking about a fairly narrow road on 10 Mile Creek.
Yeah, Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, I think it'll be done in a phased approach, meaning early on the front end, we recognize, let me back up and say, I look at it from two approaches. You're going west, you're going east.
Yep.
And there's a lot of traffic that moves. I actually know several residents of Cuna that use 10 Mile Creek Road as a cut through from the Micron area or anywhere from the Pleasant Valley area as a cut through to get to Cuna. So
And I'm thinking that the folks at Falcon Crest might be loving that too.
that I'm not going to disagree with you. I agree with you. We also recognize by the addition of, and you see on the map there, the Gem Valley Drive is a collector road. Will now, when we build it, will connect to the new 5 Mile when we build it too. When it connects to Falcon Crest, will also be a cut through.
Yeah.
I anticipate that. I'm not going to like it, but we anticipate that'll happen. And so you talk about boulevards, I think there'll be multiple boulevards in the area. And so trying to have, we talk about accommodating the cars, accommodating the gravel trucks. Let me speak to that one specifically. There's a reason why we chose to do a roundabout at the intersection of 10 Mile Creek Road and the new 5 Mile intersection, because there's a little triangle where the word 5 and 5 Mile Road is not owned by us.
Right.
And so we've really studied the area and tried to anticipate a safer intersection for all of that. So it'll be a multi-lane roundabout, has been required by the staff report. And it'll accommodate the gravel trucks. It'll slow down the gravel trucks. That's why I like it, frankly, the roundabout, so we can help control the speeds that do happen in that area.
And when you talk to the BLM and others, I guess, about the plan that's not etched in stone yet for the 5 Mile connection, emphasize safety.
So I appreciate your question. We are and have and will continue to be concerned about safety as we build this forward.
Okay. That's it for right now.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a
Commissioner Arnold?
question. Thank you. Ms. Smith raised some concerns about cul-de-sacs and lack of connectivity, and can you address those concerns and how you came to the configuration that you have and why there aren't sub-streets and that sort of thing?
Madam President, Commissioner Arnold, I think she's referring to the southern boundary. Is that what you're referring to as well? So let me point to this. Our entire western boundary is Falcon Crest Golf Course property. It's pretty tough to put a stub road into a golf course. That's why we didn't do that. We actually have in Area B along the entire western boundary a pathway that we are adding adjacent to Falcon Crest. And so we'll have pathway connectivity between our development and the Falcon Crest development. I strongly believe in and have, I think most of these commissioners know the type of developments I've built, strongly believe in more open space and more pathway connectivity than what's typically required. So that'll be a part of our development as we continue to move that forward. Now, to the south, that's really the only option, is that section between 5 Mile and the new collector road that will be built. if the commission wants to put a condition and tell us to make one of those three, pick it, I don't know, pick the middle one. I want to be sensitive to Falcon Crest. I don't know what's going on with their side, but pick one of those, or just require one stub street to the south. I know there's spacing requirements, but if that's a request by this commission, we certainly would be willing to change a cul-de-sac to be a stub to the south.
Great. That was it for questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I think that that certainly is a big concern, because obviously the notion of distinction between neighborhoods that are private and neighborhoods with public streets is that the public can drive through connected grids. They're public streets, people drive on them. When they're self-contained and the only people driving on them are the people who live there or people delivering things to them, that's a whole reason why they should be private and not because they're not connected. And obviously because there's nothing to drive to on the west side, it does make sense that at least one, which is why it does surprise me our staff didn't require one or two of those to be future stub streets. I have a big concern over Fountain Drive being cut out too, because, and we've seen this in other places where we've run into issues of sight lines. We fix the sight lines. We don't get rid of the street. Do you know what the rationale is for, would it be possible to fix the sight lines so that we have better connectivity and we aren't reducing it by a third, the access to that development?
I'm not sure I understand the question about a third, Commissioner Hanson.
On page 25 of the staff report, it shows that we're getting rid of Fountain Drive's northern access point. There's 3 access points in Area B.
Right.
Yeah, and so our staff is asking you to get rid of one of those 3, which I still don't understand the evidence, sufficient evidence to cut off an access point with all those homes in there, presumably. That puts you down to 2 and concentrates it on 2 entrances. Nobody's going to use that southern one. They're all going to use that middle one. Most of the people will use that middle one who live in the north. So,
Madam President, Commissioner
doesn't seem to make
Hanson,
sense
I
to
would
me.
add a couple of things. Again, this traffic's going to evolve over time. No question, while we're building out this first preliminary plat, all of our traffic's going north because 5 Mile isn't built yet to the south. When it is, 5 Mile Road actually goes down to Cuna Road that goes then down to downtown Cuna.
Right.
I anticipate traffic flows might change so that second access may be utilized more once that happens, but not until that time. I agree with you that main intersection, 4-way intersection will be the primary and now maybe becoming the sole intersection access. We're fine either way. We recognize due to topography constraints, we really don't have an option. We've had to build 5 Mile or design 5 Mile Road because of the terrain, because of the topography. There's about a 60 to 80 foot elevation change to that area. So that's why 5 Mile has to swing as far as it does just to make the 10% grade requirements per your policy. And so that's why 5 Mile Road is designed the way it is. And then Jim Valley has to come in secondarily at some point, again, with the terrain considerations. So we're hamstrung because of that. And with those 2 roads designed as they are, then we have to design the rest of the subdivision after that. So the question was, what was our thought process? That was it. So as staff had properly acknowledged in their presentation, we're left with a remnant of that triangle piece south and east of the main intersection of Jim Valley and 5 Mile. And how do you facilitate it? Well, you have to have 2 accesses to meet fire department requirements. And so you have to have spacing requirements per ACHD policy. And so we've tried to work with staff. If you're wanting to go a different direction, we're willing to listen, but really we think staff has guided us in the way that is probably best given the parameters that we have.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe, did you want to ask your remaining question?
You know, I think I've figured out a way to address them all.
All right. Any further comments? Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen.
Thank you again.
You have before you approval of the preliminary plat.
We're ready to make a motion? Or are we doing any more discussion first?
I've asked the question. There doesn't seem to be any take. So let's go ahead with the motion and
Okay.
we'll see what
I'd like to make a motion, and I understand fully that when I'm done, it's probably going to be fiddled with it quite a bit. I would move that we approve the staff report, subject to the following additional recommendations to the City of Kuna. Number one, that all anticipated traffic studies be conducted at the sale of the, that are anticipated to be conducted at the sale of the 350th lot be accelerated to the 175th lot unless improvements requiring those studies have already been completed. Number two, that the 2 traffic signals contemplated in the staff report be installed prior to the 100th lot sale. Number 3, that a park and ride lot be constructed by the 350th lot. Number 4, that all collectors and arterials contemplated in the staff report include detached sidewalks as well as an 8-foot protected bike facility, the design of which to be determined by staff. Number 5, that all road construction contemplated to connect Pleasant Valley Road and Cloverdale Road be completed by the 150th lot. Number 6, that construction of all road improvements anticipated at Pleasant Valley Road by the 150th lot. Number 7, that all road improvements to be conducted on 10 Mile Creek Road, 5 Mile Road, Gem Valley Drive, or Hubbard Road be completed by the 150th lot. And number 8, that the school site not be located on arterial. Thank you.
I would consider seconding if you also added that a stub street be added to the development to the south.
So that's good. Thank you. Agreed.
Okay, first, we have a motion and a second.
Second, and this is not this isn't a recommendation. This is with no recommendation. Is that correct? Since we're an advising body, we don't recommend.
We're not an advising body in this situation. We're approving the plat or not approving it. We're not recommending.
Madam President, Commissioner Steve Price again.
Mr.
No, this
Price.
is a preliminary plat application. The master plan was adopted in December, and this preliminary plat, and we're limited, as you know, for preliminary plats to really the continuity of highway pattern, widths, drainage provisions, right-of-way construction standards, traffic flow, the traffic volume demand occasioned by the proposed subdivision within or without the boundaries of the proposed subdivision. So we're, again, it's a quasi-judicial application. It was submitted to us. The application was submitted to the city of Kuna. It was submitted to us to look at those traffic issues that are in the statute that we're limited to. And if you're going to make any other requirements, the application that's been submitted, the staff report, it currently meets our policy. And if you're going to require any other additional conditions, you'll have to make independent findings of fact and conclusions of law to substantiate the need for those additional improvements and requirements. We can't just arbitrarily do it. We have to have some justification as to why you want those things and how that's necessary to mitigate the development and not create an undue burden on the road system.
And based on legal counsel, I'll
Commissioner
withdraw
Hanson.
my second.
Thank you.
Well, and that was my question. I think I understand why Mr. Goldthorpe has these concerns, but my question for Mr. Price is, don't these conditions go far beyond the legal requirements that could be placed on the application by this commission?
Madam President, Commissioner Arnold, I haven't, and staff hasn't had the opportunity to look at those conditions, but from what they sound like, those would exceed, the application as it is presented meets our policy. So for us to require additional improvements and requirements seems to indicate that they go well beyond it. I mean, I'd like to also point out that this development is making improvements beyond what we can require, and I think that's just because they want a good development. But this is the first I think we've heard of them. I'm not sure the developer has heard these before. But as the application submitted to you tonight, it meets our policy, and staff's recommendation is that you approve it.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I believe we have a question.
Yes.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Mr. Price, the findings of fact, could they not include the fact, at least in my mind, and this is why I asked some of the questions that I asked the way I did, that the development immediately to the west is going to seriously impact what we are allowing right now and the timeline for that. And so I would rather that we err, if that's the right word to use, on the side of caution than wind up with a traffic jam far earlier than we had ever anticipated, especially given the fact that we really cannot afford the CIP mitigations any earlier than we have put the one in the 5-mile integrated work plan, and then the others, which we really don't know for sure if or when we're going to do, but we put a date range in the CIP, which may or may not happen.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, legally we're required to look at this application at the date that it was submitted. And we can only look at this property at that date. We can't assume what other properties are going to do. I don't think we have an application on that. I appreciate your concern about that. I believe what you can do in some of those is that you can make recommendations. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, Gary Inselman, Deputy Director, Development Technical Services. Commissioner Goldthorpe, the traffic study submitted by the applicant, that traffic engineer projected that the interim signals would be needed with 900 trips. We wanted to look at it much sooner and earlier to address your concern, and the applicant agreed that with the 350th lot or trip, they would update the traffic study to see if those warrants were met and make the improvements at the appropriate time. We can't require a signal if warrants aren't met. We believe we have recommended and they've agreed to study it early enough to make sure that we're accounting for all of the traffic. The traffic study does account for Falcon Crest. It's a cumulative impact that we're looking at. To make sure that we have the timing correct, we've set that limit where we have, and they've agreed to it.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Price.
And if I can just follow up with that,
If you could finish that last thought, Mr. Price.
yeah, well, no, that's fine. You just can't arbitrarily grab a number of when you can trigger to have a follow-up traffic impact study, and I'm glad Gary brought that up. That was one of your conditions. We have to have warrants. The traffic impact study sets that. We did that in Harris Ranch. And in this case, the developers agreed to something that is much sooner than what the impact study would indicate is needed.
Oh, and in the case of Harris Ranch, if I might be so bold, I think we required 5 or 6, maybe, traffic studies.
We did, and there were several phases of several preliminary plats, and with each of those, there were traffic impact studies that indicated the need for updates, and we required it. I think in the end, we decided that we would only need one more, but in each instance, the traffic impact study necessitated updates.
With each preliminary
with the phasing of the development.
I just am really seriously concerned that the traffic that is going to be generated going north on Cloverdale is going to far exceed what we're expecting. I mean, we've got other people that are going to come in here tomorrow maybe with additional plats for additional developments along this same traffic corridor. And in fact, I'm sure that's going to happen.
Well, Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, I mean, I think Gary had indicated that with the traffic impact study, they're looking at the cumulative effect of all the developments out there. We don't just look at...
Are currently platted.
Right. And as they come in, then those are updated, and we adjust accordingly.
But we can't adjust what we recommend tonight, can we?
Well, we can't adjust what we don't know is going to happen for things that we haven't received an application on. We know that the property at Falcon Crest may develop. We don't know when. We have to have facts. We can't have assumptions.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I do understand it. I'm just have this personal gnawing nabob of negativity in the back of my mind here.
Well, again, Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, I don't think that the concerns that you've raised are unwarranted. I think that, remember, when we have a preliminary plat before us in a quasi-judicial setting, we have limitations of what we can do. The commission can send comments to the city of CUNA to consider for additional issues that are outside what our record are. We're not a land use agency. We don't want to act like a land use agency, but if there are issues that talk about density and impacts or the overall system, then you most certainly you can provide those recommendations if that's the will of the commission.
Well, I was really hoping I wasn't coming across like the land use god, trust me. But
You weren't.
I was?
You weren't.
Oh, thank you.
Madam President, if I could follow.
Commissioner Hanson?
Mr. Price, you recited earlier the Local Land Use Planning Act and the obligation of the broad authority that the city has under the Local Land Use Planning Act in order to impose conditions broadly. They are not restricted by the narrowness of our laws that do relate to traffic, transportation, the broad range of the health and well-being of the community. And so they have obligations and authority under the Local Land Use Planning Act. So the question is, couldn't some of the suggestions made by Commissioner Goldthorpe, as well as suggestions perhaps we haven't thought of, be imposed as conditions by the local, by the city of CUNA under the Local Land Use Planning Act?
Madam President, Commissioner Henson, you're right. I mean, the city and the county, they have general purpose government. They have broad powers to protect the general welfare of the community. This is not new to the district or the commission. We've provided comments to, with our approvals, giving heads up to the land use agency as to other issues that we heard. Whether they put it in as conditions on the approval, that's their business, but the commission's felt strongly about at least letting them know the commission's view. And that's why we provided those comments.
Yep, and that's why it would be a whole lot easier to evaluate this based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law by the city of CUNA related to those very things and how they relate to the land use. But we're operating without that evidence.
The state statute says that the land use agency, they submit it to us and we approve and accept the preliminary plat. The statute doesn't say that they accept it and approve the preliminary plat and then send it to us. It's pretty clear that we are a subordinate reviewing agency to support a decision, a land use decision for development. And that's why we do it the way we do it.
That is correct. So this evening we have a request for approval of the preliminary plat for the Spring Walk subdivision. But as Mr. Price stated, we can also do a letter stating our concerns to the city of CUNA for consideration.
Madam President.
Madam President?
Just one moment, Commissioner Baker. Commissioner Arnold had a question.
I think, well, I don't have a question. I think we have gone, far beyond what the application is that's before us, and we're kind of out in the weeds. We are not a land use agency. I understand and recognize that there are concerns about this development. There are concerns about the density and what's going to happen in that area, but they are not issues that we can legally address. We are a highway district. We have only certain items that we can address and look at, and density is not one of them. As Mr. Price has pointed out, this application meets all of ACHD's policies and requirements. So given that, I'm going to make the motion that we approve the preliminary plat application for Spring Rock subdivision in accordance with the staff report.
I think we were waiting for Commissioner Baker to make her comment. There's a motion before us. Is there a second?
Wait, we already have another motion before us.
You didn't get a second. He withdrew it.
Withdrew his
Oh,
second.
he withdrew his second.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
So I've made the motion. Is there a second?
Madam President, can I just ask a question? Did Commissioner Goldthorpe withdraw his, or did Commissioner Hanson withdraw his second?
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
There's no motion.
Okay, so the only motion before us would
Is
be
Commissioner
the one
Arnold's.
Commissioner Arnold is proposing? Okay.
Which
I'll
doesn't have
second it for,
okay.
I'll second it for discussion purposes.
Okay, so your, Commissioner Arnold, your motion was to approve the preliminary plat as presented this evening, correct?
Yes, was to approve the preliminary plat application in accordance with the staff report because it does meet all of ACHD's policies and requirements.
Correct, thank you. And Commissioner Baker, you're clear then on the motion and you do stand with your second?
Yes, my question's related to Mr. Goldthorpe's motion, so it's, the whole thing is moot now, so, okay.
Right, okay, now, discussion, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Before we vote to approve this, I think it's incumbent upon us to design and word the letter that we're going to send along with it to the city of Kuna.
Well, and I guess maybe we should ask Mr. Price another question. Is that something that needs to be addressed this evening? I mean, it really goes beyond the plat application that's before us. And I mean, there's nothing stopping Commissioner Goldthorpe from expressing his opinions to the city of Kuna, right?
Madam President, typically, and Commissioner Arnold, typically in the past, we have included those comments in the transmittal of the staff report to the city of Kuna. Again, this is a quasi-judicial matter and there's a defined record, and I'm not sure I feel comfortable of us outside that record just sending letters. So the preference would be, at least from my standpoint, is to generally include those points you want to include, and we can then draft the comments, and we can come back and review those with the commission. But I think if you just give us the general things that you would like to tell, then we can draft accordingly.
Okay, then given that advice, I will amend my motion to include that we would send a letter incorporating Commissioner Goldthorpe's concerns as comments, but not legal requirements to the city of Kuna.
So we have a amended motion now. Is there a second?
Well, I'll second it, but then I want to make a comment. So one of Mr. Goldthorpe's points was a park and ride lot. And I guess my question to him is, park and ride using what? The bus service that doesn't exist out there? And why would that need to be included at this date?
Well, between the two developments that are going out, excuse me, that are going out there, there's going to be tens of thousands of additional vehicle trips on the roads here. And if we can't figure out a way to fill a couple of vans with a park and ride, then we got real problems with our salesmanship. So that's what I was worrying about, that this far in advance.
Madam President.
Commissioner Arnold.
Just to follow up on that comment, I mean, I understand your concern, but why would it be this developer's problem that there are going to be tens of thousands of cars coming from somewhere else? I mean, he shouldn't be required to provide a park and ride for that.
Well, this master plan included tens of thousands in and of itself. So I think my point was accurately made.
Well, the only thing that is before us at this juncture is a preliminary plat.
Okay.
That's shown right there. That's all we can address at this point is the preliminary plat that is in front of us. Unless Mr. Price is telling me I'm wrong.
No, he won't tell you different.
And for matter of discussion, your motion said to incorporate some of Commissioner Goldthorpe's comments as just that, as comments.
Yes.
Separate from.
He said all of them.
And not necessarily all of them. That would have, the comments
You
would
know,
have to come back to the
respectfully, I
commission for approval.
I didn't hear all of them, so, no disrespect, but I would like an opportunity to see just exactly, or have you repeat those for us. But I would definitely be in agreement that if there are some concerns, that we do then draft a letter to be sent to the city of Cuna.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Price? So should the
Commissioner
motion
Arnold.
just be that we will include a letter incorporating whatever comments that Commissioner Goldthorpe made that the rest of the commission is willing to adopt at a later date? We'd need an opportunity to review those before we put them in.
Madam President, Commissioner Arnold, the trick is the city of Cuna is scheduled to meet on this on Tuesday. So you're pretty much, we need to identify those issues that Commissioner Goldthorpe, I can't remember them all. There's 6 or 7 different ones, and of those that relate to the preliminary plat. So if you could identify those, then we can include that as in the transmittal.
He just stated that he has 8, and I believe Commissioner Hanson added the Stubb Street as a concern.
And I'll be happy to give you my copy.
And you just need to tell us which of those the 3 commissioners agree to transmit on. So I think you need to go through them and say.
One by one.
Okay, let's have him read them again then.
We vote on each one of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 1, that all anticipated.
Madam President? Madam
Commissioner
President?
Baker?
Can we at least vote on the motion to approve the plat subsequent to the, with conditions in the staff report, and then go through these one by one?
Looks like
I
Mr.
think we
Price
can
is
do that.
nodding that we could do
Because it
that.
just said a
Go
letter.
ahead.
That's fine, either way is
Incorporating
fine.
some. So we'll go ahead and call for a
Okay,
decision.
so then the motion that we would be approving is
The preliminary plat.
the preliminary plat be approved in accordance with the staff report, and then we'll take subsequent action on the comments.
Comments, correct.
Okay, and is Commissioner Baker in agreement with that as the
Yes.
motion? Okay.
Okay. So call for the decision. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries 3-2.
Okay, so
Goldthorpe, if we could go through your list.
Sure. And then, okay, number 1, that all anticipated traffic studies to be conducted at the sale of the 350th lot be accelerated to the 175th lot unless improvements requiring those studies have already been completed.
Discussion? Commissioner Baker?
Sounds good to me.
These are just recommendations, right?
Yes.
I mean,
The motion's
yeah.
already passed.
But if I may, Madam President, Commissioner Baker, this is inconsistent with what you just adopted.
right. And I don't think those are matters that the city of Cuna would even address.
Wasn't the letter part of your motion that was just?
Well, not as we changed it, that we were going to talk about the comments and adopt them after.
So my observation, Madam President, is that because we are a separately elected body, this is not the Cuna Highway Department. They will not add any requirements, they're likely not, at least the pattern I've observed, anything related to transportation. And so these are the kinds of things that they would have expected ACHD to have adopted, so that it's not likely that CUNA will, even though they have the authority to do so. They have broad authority under the Land Use Planning Act, but the pattern is that they will make the assumption that anything related to transportation is now done with respect to this plat, and they'll focus on all non-transportation related conditions.
Madam President and Commissioners, maybe I can help. A lot of the times in the past, the comments have been more general. And maybe Commissioner Goldthorpe, the language that in the note would go that the commission is very concerned about future growth in this area and the impacts of additional traffic on the existing infrastructure, that we caution the city of CUNA to take a hard look at any future development that comes into the area to make sure that it's consistent with their comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance, and that the existing infrastructure can accommodate that future growth.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly where I was going. Just kind of a general letter of concern, comments. Mr. Goldthorpe, would you find that
We already
acceptable?
included as an additional comment with the last hearing that
Correct.
we couldn't pay for it anyway, right?
Yes.
Then I would suggest that whatever the majority of this commission wants to put in the letter, that they do. And
Well,
that sounds about as generic as we can get it, and still.
I would suggest that we do just exactly, that's what I was thinking would be the best way forward, rather than sit here and go number by number. Do just a general concern type letter. Do we need a separate motion for that? We did include that. A letter with comments would be included, so I think we're good.
And if you like that language that I did from the hip, then you can adopt that and we'll include that in the letter.
I
Well,
thought,
and I guess-
very good.
Commissioner Goldthorpe, would you like to
Be-
make the motion that we include that language if it satisfies your?
Well, I voted against the motion, but that doesn't mean I won't go along with the language of the letter.
I think we've achieved what we were set out to do here. By law, we've approved the preliminary plat. We also know we're going to put a letter of concern with comments generally stated and send it off to the city of CUNA.
Well, but Commissioner, Mr. Price, Mr. Price, sorry, I almost gave you a demotion there. Mr. Price pointed out that
Don't include me in that, please.
we would need to include whatever language we were going to include in the letter tonight, since they are meeting on this before we would meet again.
So my recommendation is you approve the language that I just said. We'll include that language in the transmittal to the city of CUNA.
I would
We'll be able to
approve
make that deadline.
And I think that works, but I'd like to hear from the other commissioners.
Commissioner Baker?
On that.
Madam President, I think that's fine. I also think that the language we included in the last application regarding that Commissioner Goldthorpe referenced regarding, paying for, how are we going to pay for these improvements? I don't know exactly how the language went, but I think we could probably include that as well, just so everyone's on notice that there is that issue outstanding in the future.
Madam President, Commissioners, that's not our problem. We can include that language as well.
Excellent. Any objection? Hearing none, then we will move on to our next and last item on our agenda.
Can you approve that? Have a motion
We
and
did.
approve that?
Oh, are we doing a
I didn't hear
motion?
a vote on that, yeah.
Oh. I move to accept the language presented by Mr. Price to include the language from our past decision, a letter to the city of CUNA.
And I will second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 I'll abstain.
Motion carries. Now on to public communications. Is there anybody left that would like to say something? State your name and address.
Tellerico, 1200 North Curtis Road, Boise. I am a reporter at the Idaho Statesman. I was told that this would be a good time for me to ask some of the questions that I needed addressed. So let me pull those up. This is in relation to the item on bike lanes in Boise. This was a question that I had for Commissioner Arnold, but I think that it could be addressed to the entire commission. But to start with, Commissioner Arnold, you cited a concern that you did not want to support the bike lane project in downtown Boise without more data on how many bike trips are generated on these streets. My question for you and the commissioners is, why does ACHD itself not collect data on non-vehicle trips for its roads?
Well, first of all, your opening statement was not exactly accurate. I did feel like we needed some additional information on bicycle use in the area because there is none. And no, ACHD doesn't generally do bicycle counts. We don't have the equipment to count bicycles. It's been done, but it's been done by the city. And in this instance, apparently they chose not to.
Would that not be in your authority as the ACHD Commission to set policy on what types of data the commission collects? Or ACHD collects, excuse me.
Yes,
Yes, it would.
We do set
Yes,
policy.
it should.
In fact, you can do traffic or bicycle or pedestrian counts using a clicker and a person sitting on a stool. That's an approved way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree with your premise that we should be measuring all modes of transportation. What we don't use and have chosen specifically not to use is a model that is provided in our data and the software we use to do level of service for pedestrian, bike, and transit. So we don't have that comparable data, even though we know intuitively that when you have safe modes, other modes, you actually contribute to the reduction of car dependency, but we don't do that comparative analysis. We also have areas where there is safe bike and pedestrian use, and that it would be comparable to this area that we're considering, and so we could draw the same parallels, but we don't do those measurements, so we don't draw them. It's not terribly effective to do an unsafe area and say, well, there's not much bike use. It's a little like saying, well, we really don't need to build a bridge at this point over the river because no one's crossing it. Obviously, people don't use unsafe facilities. Most people are smart. So there's ways of doing it, and I think integrating it, because it has to be so integrated into the very things that people are going to, the uses they want to make. Go downtown to, like the students, we heard the example of students coming down to go to lunch. So it's very integrated into the land uses. And so that data is very valuable, but the assumption we make is that, well, let the land use agency do it. To a great extent, Boise does do it with respect to their transportation action plan. I haven't seen that out of CUNA or Eagle, but, and Meridian's working on developing that. But again, they may develop it, but we're not obligated to use it. So I think it's true. There's a potential of tremendous data out there for bicycle and pedestrian use, particularly how it reduces transportation demand management on cars, or applies to the concept of transportation demand management. But that's a longer-winded answer, but basically says why we're very focused on level of service for cars, and that's what drives, my perception is that's what drives the bulk of our decision-making.
Would it be correct to say that this commission does not have the intention of setting policy for ACHD that would require data collection on other modes of transportation other than
Ma'am, we've never considered that.
Mr. Price, I think you might want to be giving us some advice here on what's appropriate for public communications.
Madam
liaison.
President, Commissioners, and Kate, during public discussion, the commission can't make any decisions, and they can't opine as to decisions that they may or may not make in the future. the commission doesn't have all the information relative to that topic, and if the commission considered a review of that, then that would be the time that they would make a decision. They can't surmise it or make that type of comments this evening.
Okay, but
I would make one correction, Steve, and that was last year I did specifically request that we adopt level of service for pedestrian and bike. We had a public work session right in this space. The commission declined.
and that was last
Majority.
year.
That
Okay.
was last year, I believe.
Okay,
Might have been the year before.
great.
Were you?
That's it that I had, unless there were any other thoughts.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
All right. No one else? Then we stand adjourned. Thank you.